Data set distribution, clusters, gaps, peaks, and outliers. Which of the following are accurate description of the distribution below? Okay, so it says distribution is a peak from 10 to 15. So 10 to 15 would be the peak. No, that's not correct. The distribution has a gap from 25 to 30. So it has a gap from 25 to 30. Now a gap would be missing, like missing teeth or something. So you have some teeth, and all of a sudden you're missing teeth. That's considered to be a gap. So our gap here would actually be in this area here. So we would look at the 15 to 25 would be our gap. So really, none of the responses they gave us worked. So this would be none. Which of the following is an accurate description of the distribution below? The distribution is a peak at 4 years. So peak would be the highest. So the highest would be at 4. But that's not true. The peak looks like it would be 2 because we have more dots there. The distribution has a gap from 5 to 7. Well, from 5 to 7, it's not a gap because there are actually points there, or actually dots there. So that's not true. So again, this would be none of the above. Which of the following are accurate descriptions of the distribution below? The distribution has an outlier. So an outlier would be a number that's disconnected from the rest of these rest of these bars going up. It would be way over to the side, way over to the right, or way over to the left. But there's nothing here because all these bars are connected. They're touching each other. So that's not correct. The distribution has a cluster from 0 to 39. So from 0 to 39, a cluster there. Well, that's not a cluster, that's a gap because there's really no number shown there. So that would be considered to be a gap. Which of the following are accurate description of the distribution below? The distribution has a peak from 41, has a peak at 41 years. Yes, do you see that's the highest right there? So that is correct. The distribution has a cluster from 47 to 49. Now that would actually be true because a cluster is points that are kind of separated from other points. They could be like we talked about before, like outliers. But in this case here, I mean, they're still in the 40s because it goes from 33 and it continues 44, and then there's your gap because the gap means you have nothing there, so there's no points there whatsoever. But then you come over here and you see all these points are grouped together. Well, that would actually be considered a cluster, and that does run from roughly 47 to 49, so we would accept that one as well. So both A and B would be correct. Which of the following are accurate description of the distribution below? The distribution has a gap from 8 to 11. So from 8 to 11, there's a gap there. No, the gap runs 2, 3, 4, 5. So roughly from 2 to 5 is actually the gap because there's no data there whatsoever. So if there's nothing shown there, that's considered to be a gap. The distribution has a cluster from 2 to 5. So from 2 to 5, they're calling this a cluster. When it's not a cluster, it's a gap. This is a cluster. So from 0 to 1 is considered a cluster. This big thing could also be considered a cluster as well, but that is not a cluster. So the distribution is a cluster from 2 to 5. That's incorrect. That's a gap. And the distribution has a gap from 8 to 11. That's not true because we do actually have data there. So they're both false. Which of the following are accurate description of the distribution below? Choose all answers that apply. The distribution has an outlier. Well, not really, because the 19 to 25, they are relatively connected to each other, so it's not a wide spread of numbers. I mean, if this thing jumped up into the 40s, if this thing was maybe at 2 or 1, yes, those could be considered outliners. But 19 to 25, I believe that those are numbers that are close to each other. So the distribution is outliner, no. The distribution is a peak at 22. That is true because the highest is at 22. So the peak is always the highest. So the only choice here would be B. Okay, which of the following are accurate descriptions of the distribution below? The distribution has an outlier. Yes, because you see that the 0 to the 4 sits by itself and then it jumps up to 15 to 19 and goes way up to 49. So I would consider this to be an outlier at 0 to 4. The distribution has a gap from 20 to 29. So from 20 to 29 is a gap. No, that's incorrect. The gap actually starts at 5 and goes to 19. So 5 to 19 would be the gap. Because remember, a gap has no data. So there is an outliner because, 0 to 4 is a really small number compared to, 15 to 45 to 49. So the only choice here would be A.